This is the story of a single denied signature. What Camilla realized behind closed doors late last week was not the result of a screaming match or a public scandal, but a quiet, suffocating realization of her own vulnerability in less than 24 hours. What looked like a routine administrative update regarding the Duchy of Cornwall was actually a total dismantling of her empire. She discovered that a private financial transfer, a quietly engineered lifeline meant to secure her family's future, had been intercepted. Frozen and permanently revoked. There was no argument, there was no negotiation, there was only a cold institutional notification that her access to the Crown's private wealth had been severed. What this video will unpack is the secret power grab Camilla attempted in the shadows of the King's declining health. How Prince William uncovered the paper trail and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. By the end of this story, you will understand the devastating realization that has left the Queen, consort paralyzed the terrifying truth that despite the crown on her head, she actually owns nothing. Before this moment of absolute humiliation, the illusion of power Camilla operated under was staggering. For 30 years, she played the longest, most brutal game in modern royal history. She survived being the most despised woman in Britain. She methodically erased the lingering shadow of Diana, Princess of Wales, replacing public hostility with a carefully manufactured tolerance. She married the future king, embedded herself in the highest echelons of the British establishment, and finally stood inside Westminster Abbey to feel the weight of Queen Mary's crown placed upon her head. In her mind, that coronation was the ultimate victory. It was the absolute guarantee of her untouchability. She believed that because she had Charles completely controlled, she had the institution itself controlled. She began to move, with a breathtaking level of entitlement subtly pushing to elevate her non-royal children, demanding greater visibility for her own legacy and acting as the definitive gatekeeper to the dying king. She believed the transition of power would happen on her terms, but this belief was rooted in a fatal misunderstanding of how the British monarchy actually functions. Camilla confused proximity to power with the possession of it. That detail matters because it is the precise weakness that William used to completely destroy her. The trigger for this crisis was an act of staggering commercial desperation. Behind the gold carriages and the velvet ropes, the reality of Camilla's position is fundamentally hollow. Unlike William, who inherited a billion-dollar empire the moment his grandmother died, Camilla possesses no sovereign wealth. She holds no ancestral estates. Every palace she sleeps in, every piece of jewelry she wears, and every security detail that protects her is owned by the crown, and the crown is shifting rapidly away from her husband. Sensing this closing window, Camilla attempted a secret maneuver. What appears to be true based on tightening palace financial audits is that she tried to secure a massive permanent residential trust for her son, Tom Parker Bowles, quietly funneling resources from the royal estates into a private multi-generational lease. It was a brilliant, highly discreet plan designed to anchor her bloodline into the royal real estate portfolio before Charles was gone. She assumed that Charles, weakened by his medical treatments and utterly dependent on her daily support, would rubber stamp the paperwork without asking questions. She also assumed that the machinery of the palace would silently process the transfer, just as they had accommodated her endless demands for the past 2 decades. But that is where the story changes, not because she misjudged Charles, but because she fundamentally underestimated William. When Charles became king, the Duchy of Cornwall, the vast, ancient estate that funds the private lives of the royal family, was automatically transferred to the Prince of Wales. William did not just inherit a title, he inherited the bank, and William does not manage his inheritance with the sentimental, outdated gentility of his father. He approaches the monarchy like a ruthless chief executive auditing a failing corporation. Months ago, William ordered a comprehensive forensic review of all estate allocations, leases, and financial promises made by the Crown. He demanded to see every ledger, every guest list, and every property deed. What happened next was an execution of institutional power, so cold it sent a shockwave through the entire palace staff. William's estate lawyers flagged the quiet, expedited lease agreement designed for Camilla's son. They saw exactly what it was: an exploitation of Crown assets to enrich a family that has no constitutional right to them. William did not leak the story to the tabloids. He did not storm into Clarence's house and demand an explanation. He executed a silent institutional retaliation that paralyzed Camilla's maneuver entirely. He simply used his absolute authority over the duchy to freeze the transfer. He revoked the administrative passes that allowed Camilla's private staff to access the estate management offices. and then he went a step further. He quietly issued a new set of binding financial protocols stipulating that absolutely no crown properties could be transferred, leased, or subsidised for non-royal family members without the direct written authorisation of the Prince of Wales. The brilliance of this move was its complete lack of emotion. It was a weaponization of administrative protocol. On paper, it was just standard estate management. In reality, it was a devastating humiliation. Camilla's children were quietly stripped of their VIP estate access. They were suddenly required to use standard visitor entrances. The invisible red carpet was rolled up and locked away. The realization hit Camilla with the force of a physical blow. The money, the land. The real power, it all belongs to William. The psychological terror of this realization cannot be overstated. Camilla has spent 3 decades convincing herself that she had won the war. But William's silent strike exposed the brutal truth of her existence. Her entire empire is a lease, and her landlord is the son of the woman she destroyed. The moral outrage of seeing Diana's legacy quietly restored through William's absolute control over the family's wealth is the ultimate poetic justice. William is protecting the crown, yes, but he is also protecting his mother's memory, ensuring that the woman who caused so much destruction will never profit from the institution she infiltrated. Trapped, humiliated, and watching her carefully constructed future evaporate, Camilla did the only thing she had left. She went directly to Charles. She presented the revoked lease and the denied access passes. She demanded that the King of England overrule his son, override the duchy, and force William to restore her family's access. She stood in front of the man who had burned his reputation to the ground to make her queen, expecting him to save her one last time. When Camilla placed the denied lease agreement and the revoked access passes on Charles's desk, the atmosphere in the room was reportedly suffocating. This was the moment of ultimate testing. For 3 decades, Camilla had relied on Charles's unwavering, almost obsessive devotion to shield her from every consequence. He had fought his mother, alienated his public, and fractured his relationship with his sons, all to ensure that Camilla would sit beside him on the throne. She expected him to do what he had always done. She expected him to intervene to summon William and to reassert his absolute authority as the reigning monarch. But as Charles looked at the paperwork and then looked at his wife, he did something that Camilla had never experienced from him before. He did nothing. He looked away. That devastating silence was the psychological climax of Camilla's entire royal existence. Charles did not yell. He did not defend William's actions. He simply explained with the quiet exhaustion of a man who knows his own reign is fading, that the Duchy of Cornwall was now entirely William's jurisdiction. The King of England, the man who had torn the British establishment apart to make her his queen, quietly admitted that he could not overrule his heir on matters of the estate. He refused to trigger a constitutional and familial crisis over a real estate maneuver for his stepson. In that agonizingly quiet moment, Charles chose the survival of his institution over the comfort of his wife. For Camilla, the realization was absolute and terrifying. The man who had always been her ultimate weapon was now too weak, too tired, and too pragmatically constrained to save her. To understand the sheer commercial desperation that drove Camilla to this point, you have to look past the diamonds and the state banquets and examine the brutal mathematics of royal survival. When a reigning British monarch passes away, their spouse becomes the Queen Dowager. Historically, Queen Dowagers were protected by immense independent wealth and the fierce loyalty of their children who took the throne. When King George VI died, the Queen Mother retreated to her own Scottish castle, funded by her own massive sovereign allowances and revered by her daughter Queen Elizabeth II. Camilla has none of these safety nets. She possesses no royal blood. She commands no universal public adoration, and most crucially, she controls no independent institutional wealth. Everything Camilla currently enjoys is tied directly to the breath in Charles's lungs. The moment Charles is gone, Camilla's constitutional relevance evaporates instantly. She will no longer be the queen consort. She will be the widow of a king living at the mercy of a new king who has spent 30 years silently carrying the grief of a mother she helped destroy. William will own the palaces. William will control the sovereign grant. William will decide which properties she is allowed to inhabit, which security details will protect her, and what financial allowance she will receive. Camilla's secret attempt to secure that duchy lease for her son was not just a greedy power grab. It was a frantic 11th hour attempt to build a financial lifeboat because she knows exactly what is waiting for her in the dark waters of William's reign. She knows that she is entirely dependent on the grace of a man who owes her nothing. And And while Camilla was desperately trying to manipulate estate leases to secure her family's future, Catherine was quietly demonstrating what real enduring power looks like. The contrast between the two women is a masterclass in the psychology of true sovereignty versus borrowed authority. Catherine did not need to scramble in the shadows for property deeds. She did not need to leverage a dying king's affections to secure her relevance. Catherine simply held her ground, executing her duties with the uncomplaining, steadfast grace that has made her the undisputed emotional anchor of the modern royal family. The shift in power has not been broadcast through loud press releases, but through subtle, devastatingly clear visual and protocol changes that everyone inside the palace has noticed. During recent state receptions, the natural centre of gravity has shifted entirely toward the Prince and Princess of Wales. Staff members, courtiers, and visiting dignitaries subtly defer to Catherine, reading the room and understanding instinctively that they are looking at the future. There is a quiet restoration happening, a deliberate realignment of the monarchy's moral compass. Pieces of Diana's legacy are being restored not with aggressive public statements, but with undeniable visual poetry. When Catherine steps out wearing Diana's sapphire earrings or the lover's knot tiara, it is no longer just a tribute. Under William's newly consolidated power, it is a statement of ownership. It is a reminder that the lineage of the next king runs directly through Diana, and that the institution has finally been secured by a woman who genuinely understands the weight of duty. Camilla is watching the entire architecture of the monarchy being redesigned right in front of her, and she is entirely powerless to stop it. The tragedy of her situation is that she is the architect of her own isolation. She spent decades believing that if she could just get the title, she would win the game. She endured the hatred, the public humiliation, and the endless scandals, all for the ultimate prize of the crown. But the crown is just a piece of metal. It does not grant you the love of the public. It does not rewrite the history of your actions. And it certainly does not protect you from a son who has patiently waited 30 years to balance the scales. William's silent execution of revenge is a chilling reminder of how institutional power truly operates. He did not scream. He did not leak angry stories to the tabloids. He simply used the cold administrative machinery of the monarchy to lock the doors and cut the financial lifelines. He took the one thing Camilla thought she had secured forever, which was her untouchability, and dismantled it with a few strokes of a pen. This is not just a story about a denied lease or a revoked access pass. It is the story of a 30-year bill finally coming due. It is the realization that you can manipulate a man, you can manipulate the press, and you can even manipulate your way into a coronation, but you cannot manipulate the brutal, uncompromising reality of the British succession. Camilla's empire was always an illusion built on borrowed time and borrowed money. Now the time is running out, the money is locked away, and the man holding the key is the one person she can never control. As the transition of power accelerates behind the iron gates of Buckingham Palace, the Queen Consort is learning the coldest lesson of all. In the game of royal survival, proximity to the king means nothing when you are quietly at war with the man who owns the future. If you found this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics of the royal family insightful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We will continue to track this unprecedented transition of power and bring you the forensic truth behind the palace walls. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.